Sergio Perez or Nico Hulkenburg? Hello, my name is Alex Does F1 Stuff and welcome back to another random F1 episode, and today it is a statistical comparison and one of Sergio Perez versus Nico Hulkenburg against their times as teammates at Force India from 2014 to 2016. So with my statistical comparisons between drivers, we tend to look a little bit further than just the head-to-head battles in qualifying and the race to determine who is the better. And today we are going one step further than that as well. We are looking at each individual qualifying session, Q1, 2 and 3 for the 3 years, as well as all of the races combined. This is my most in-depth statistical comparison of two drivers so far. So without further ado, let us begin with statistically comparing Perez with Hulkenburg. So we begin in 2014 and we're going to be taking a look at all of the qualifying sessions first. So let's pull up the first half of the season for 2015. This graph is going to show the Q1 gaps to each driver, the Q2 gaps between each driver, and the Q3 gaps to each driver, as long as both cars made it into that particular session. So as I fill in the Q1 times, we will see Nico Hulkenburg on the right and Sergio Perez on the left, and we can see a definite tendency that so far in the first half of 2014, Nico Hulkenburg is faster in Q1, and then filling in these times again for Q2, we see much the same tendency. And then finally, the Q3 times, it is just the two occasions where both cars made it into Q3, a 2-second advantage in Britain for Hulkenburg compared to a 200th advantage for Perez in Germany. So what does the second half of 2014 look like? Let's take a little look at that. So pulling up the Q1 advantages, we see another whitewash for Nico Hulkenburg. About to say Sergio Perez, but that wasn't correct. And filling in the gaps for Q2, it is actually Sergio Perez who has the advantage over Nico Hulkenburg, with both drivers failing to get into Q3 together to achieve a gap. So what does this look like in terms of a Q1, 2 and 3 comparison over the whole year? If I just fill in the average Q1 advantage time, it is just under 7/10 of a second for Nico Hulkenburg to be in front of Sergio Perez, compared to a 3.5 advantage for Sergio. And then we have Q2, which again massively goes to Nico Hulkenburg, 8.5 to 1.5, and then Q3, because there's only one value, it's a little bit it's very skewed actually, and isn't included in any other averages throughout this video. So with that said, and their first year of teammates out of the way, let's take a look at 2015 and what the first half of the season has in store. Once again, Nico Hulkenburg is on the right with Sergio Perez on the left, and you can see that Perez actually fights back a little bit more, but the advantage still just lies with Nico Hulkenburg. And filling in the Q2 times, it is once again Hulkenburg who takes back that advantage, and for Q3, it is once again Hulkenburg taking it in Canada. So with a stranglehold so far for Nico Hulkenburg in the first half, what can happen in the second? Let's take a look. The Q1 times are thus, and it is Sergio Perez who fights back strongly with slightly even averages, but Sergio has more times outperformed Hulkenburg in Q1, and Q2, this is definitely in Sergio's favour, and Q3, it is a whitewash for Sergio Perez, a much better second half of the season in 2015, and comparing the Q1, 2 and 3 sessions together, averaging them all out over the years, we have a half a second advantage for Hulkenburg in Q1 to 2.5 for Sergio. In Q2, it is a little bit closer, just over 3/10 for Hulkenburg and just over 2/10 for Perez, and Q3, even though the average is towards Hulkenburg, he only managed to outperform Perez in Q3 once, compared to the 5 or 6 times that Perez managed it. So I'm giving Q3 to Sergio Perez, however, Q1 and Q2 aren't in his favour, so overall it goes to Nico Hulkenburg. And lastly, what does 2016 have in store? One of the longest seasons in Formula One's history. Let's take a look at the first half of the season and filling in the Q1 times. There are a lot to go through in this one, and it is fairly even, much closer between both drivers throughout the Q1 session. And then filling it in for Q2, it is again in Sergio Perez's favour just ever so slightly, with a small outlier value in Hungary of 1.5 seconds in Hulkenberg's favour. And then Q3 is towards Nico Hulkenberg. And if I just send away this first half of the season and pull up the second half and fill this in from Belgium onwards, we see that Hulkenberg manages to fight back slightly with a small outlier value at Singapore for Sergio Perez, and Q2 times it is back towards Hulkenberg yet again, and finally Q3 it is Sergio Perez again who takes an advantage. It is much more even in 2016 than it has been for the first 2 years, and averaging all of these times out over the Q1, 2 and 3 comparisons, we have an incredibly close Q1 battle, 2.7 tenths for Hulkenberg to 2.5 tenths for Sergio Perez. Q2 is a little bit bigger, 3.7 tenths for Hulkenberg and 2.2 for Sergio Perez, but Q3, Perez finally has the advantage. So what does this mean in terms of their 3 years as teammates as a whole? Let's take a look at another graph for qualifying. Their Q1, 2 and 3 averages over their 3 years. So Q1 goes to Nico Hulkenberg by just over 1/10 of a second. Q2 also goes to Nico Hulkenberg by 3/10 of a second. And Q3 also goes to Nico Hulkenberg. So Hulkenberg over the 3 years was the better qualifier. And then another graph that we can pull up is the times each driver was ahead of one another in Q1, 2 and 3. And that is 35-24 in Q1 towards Hulkenberg, 28-24 in Q2, a little bit closer, and then in Q3 when it matters, it is actually Sergio Perez who outperforms Hulkenberg. Now, if I send all of this away, we can easily see this from the head-to-head battles. If I just quickly fill in all of this data, 11-8 to Hulkenberg, 11-8 to Hulkenberg again in 2015, and then 12-9 in 2016. But I like to go a little bit further than just the head-to-head battles. So yes, you can pull some of that information, but people may not have realised how close it was in 2016. Even though the head-to-head battles makes it seem like Hulkenberg had a massive advantage, that wasn't necessarily the case. But let's throw it back to 2014 again, and let's take a look at the race performance. All of the races throughout the whole year. Nico Hulkenberg on the right and Sergio Perez on the left. Now, Perez had a mammoth amount of DNFs in Hulkenberg's favour. 3 that year, 1 did not start, and on 1 occasion in Brazil they finished on different racing laps. But what does this mean in terms of an average? Let's pull this up here. So the average gap when in front. Hulkenberg was 24.1 seconds in front of Perez, compared to just 6.5 seconds in front for Perez. That is a very, very big difference in pace. And then comparing this to the points at the end of the year, 96 for Hulkenberg and 59 for Sergio Perez. So 2014 in qualifying and hands down in the race performance goes to Nico Hulkenberg. But if we take this to 2015 and have a look at how the races compare, once again Nico Hulkenberg on the right and Sergio Perez on the left, it is Hulkenberg who has his fair share of DNFs and did not start, with 3 times again the drivers finishing on different laps in Hulkenberg's favour. But if we have a look at the average gap in front for both of these drivers, 28.3 seconds for Hulkenberg, extending his 2014 advantage, and 13.6 seconds for Sergio Perez. But the points at the end of the year tell a slightly different story. 58 for Hulkenberg and 78 for Perez after scoring some podiums. And even though Hulkenberg had an enormous advantage when he was in front of Sergio Perez, it just wasn't a particularly consistent year. So I have to give 2015 race performance to Sergio Perez. And to me, race performance has a bit of a stronger advantage than qualifying performance. So 2014 or 2015 as a whole goes to Sergio Perez, even though Hulkenberg won the qualifying round. Racing has slightly more weighting. So far, it is 1 apiece. Hulkenberg is better in 2014, but Sergio Perez is better in 2015. Let's take a look at the final year, 2016. So if we just pull up all of the races for the 2016 season, for the final time, Nico Hulkenberg on the right and Sergio Perez on the left. and for some reason my animation stopped halfway through. Once again, the DNFs are not in Hulkenberg's favour. 4 across the whole season and 1 occasion where they finished on different laps in Sergio Perez's favour. And averaging out these advantages, it is clear that the average gap when in front for Hulkenberg was 10.5 seconds and for Perez 23.2, a mammoth difference much like the 2015 one. And then again, clearly the points at the end of the year. Hulkenberg 72 and Perez 101 with even more podiums to his name. And clearly now we have to give 2016 100% to Sergio Perez, which means even though Hulkenberg won 2016 in qualifying, the races hold more weighting and Sergio Perez takes that title, which means he wins in 2015 and 2016. So overall across their 3 years, it is 2-1 to Sergio Perez. Now I've just got a couple more graphs to pull up at the end of this video. So we have the DNFs and times that they finished on different laps over the 3 years. Hulkenberg had 8 in the 3 years compared to just 3 for Sergio Perez. However, it was a slightly different story in terms of times lapped. Hulkenberg was lapped twice by Perez and Perez was lapped 7 times by Nico Hulkenberg. And then if I just pull up the average gaps when ahead for the 3 years, it is a slightly different story. 2016 definitely goes to Sergio Perez, but 2014 and 2015 advantage-wise goes to Hulkenberg. As we discussed previously in 2015, it actually went to Sergio Perez on the points basis. But their average advantage when in front, Hulkenberg does have some pace when he is in front. It's just he's not particularly consistent due to mechanical or other retirements that have happened to him throughout the years. And again, we can see this in the head-to-head battles. 2014 was 10-8 to Hulkenberg, but then it was definitely Sergio Perez dominated. But hopefully you can see now that things go a little bit deeper, things go massively deeper than just the head-to-head battles. You can extract so much more information than just looking at the head-to-head battle statistics and the podium statistics. But overall, looking at this data, Sergio Perez is the better driver than Nico Hulkenberg. But that is all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next video with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.